Following the video I made on Epicurus and his philosophy of death, I thought it would take the time to make a short introduction to Epicureanism as a whole, though, as I will emphasize for stress that this is barely scratching the surface, as this strain of philosophy encompasses a vast array of works and thinkers, including Epicurus himself, Lucretius, the poet Virgil, and modern defenders such as philosophers Michel Onfray and James Warren. In addition, as I will not cover Epicurus's view of death in this video, having already covered the topic, I will leave a link in the description below to the other dedicated video. We start by stating that although Epicureanism is often considered an ancient philosophy, it is still very much in practice in one form or another today. This is witnessed by Epicurean groups all around the world, including groups on media platforms such as Facebook, where members interact through posts and Zoom calls, for instance, and the existence of other real-life chapter groups around the world. Although this branch of philosophy is perhaps not gaining the same amount of popularity as, say, Stoic philosophy in popular culture, there is still references made, including in popular literature, e.g. self-help books, or through the proliferation of popular memes on the internet. Lastly, Epicureanism, along with other philosophies, popular especially within ancient Roman philosophy, is often overlooked in academia, where branches making up Roman philosophy are treated as mere commas in relation to the heavily scrutinized and studied classical ancient Greek philosophy, which frequents student theses and papers to a much larger degree, with famous names popping up such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The often topical comment heard about how ancient Roman philosophy itself is a mere response and terse commentary on ancient Greek philosophy unfortunately still prevails. As a response, we first of all, that the degrees of separation between Greek and Roman philosophy is not as wide as one would think. In fact, in addition to writing in Latin, several Roman philosophers continued to write in Greek. And most importantly, it's clear that when reading works from the time period, such as Meditations on the Shortness of Life or Confessions, that the contribution exceeds that of mere commentary, where we see original contributions being played out. Even if we accept the premise that ancient Roman philosophy functions merely in the realm of providing commentary to already existent ancient Greek philosophy, then there is still possible to raise new questions and deliver both new interpretations as well as criticism, which goes far beyond the scope of evaluation and commentary of existing works. In fact, a nice modern parallel to this would be found in many works comprising postmodern philosophy, where a critical assessment of earlier philosophy has led to novel interpretations and new discoveries, and is an integral part of that branch of philosophy. Now, with the preface and caveats out of the way, let's get back to looking at Epicureanism. Epicurus was born a mere 7 years after Plato's death, in an Athenian settlement situated in ancient Greece around 341 BC. He must surely have received a classical ancient Greek education at the time, as his later rhetorical command in written Greek text indicate. This would include a typical Platonist schooling, including disciplines such as metaphysics and geometry, which the Greeks worshipped most of all for mathematics. He is later known to have gone deeper into this type of training while studying with a Samian Platonist named Pamphilus. He would also study under another teacher named Nausiphanes, who himself was a follower of Democritus, which could perhaps explain the later emphases on atoms as the fundamental building blocks of the world for Epicurus, in his works on metaphysics. More on this later. After the death of Epicurus, there was a spread of Epicurean thought around the Hellenistic world. Now, as an interesting side note, Greece itself is a Latin name given by the Romans. If anything, the ancient Greek people would have referred to themselves as Hellenes, living in the country of Hellas. Anyways, Epicureanism continued to exert its influence in ancient Roman philosophy before meeting a demise with the rise of Christianity. We may perhaps explain this later demise, coupled with the lack of source material from Epicurus himself, with the fact that this branch of philosophy was seen as a threat to Christian orthodoxy, owing to the fact that Epicurus preached a materialist metaphysics devoid of an afterlife. In any case, Epicureanism certainly reached a large following for a long time and was considered a strong contender as a branch of philosophy, especially in ancient Roman philosophy, starting in many ways with the Roman poet-philosopher Lucretius. In fact, Epicureanism may be considered as one of the three major branches of Roman philosophy, the other two being Stoicism and academic skepticism, respectively, although, of course, there existed other philosophical schools as well at the time. Some of these schools may perhaps be considered more progressive than others, such as the Cynics, who emphasized a life free from possessions, while other schools were more concerned with carrying on the torch of tradition. These included the Middle Platonists, for instance, which were established already in 90 BC and further expanded upon by other philosophers such as Alcinous, a philosopher who is believed to have lived in the 2nd century AD. The Stoics, belonging to the school of Stoicism, were originally founded in 3rd century BC in Athens by Zeno of Citium, although many important subsequent developments were made through ancient Roman philosophy with thinkers such as Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. After Stoicism got a foothold in Rome, this was much due to the work of the Greek philosopher Panaetius, who helped spread Stoicism to Rome. These Stoics sought happiness, or to use the Greek equivalent, eudaimonia, through the practice of 4 cardinal virtues derived from virtue ethics, namely prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. The academic skeptics, on the other hand, also had ancient Greek origins, believed to have been established around 266 BC, with strong ties to the period of ancient Platonism, and among the most prominent ancient Greek members included Arcellus, Carneades, and Philo of Larissa. It is important here to distinguish the academic skeptics from the already existing school of skepticism in Greece, namely the Pyrrhonists, who were founded somewhat earlier, and in contrast to the academic skeptics, did not believe that knowledge of things is a mere impossible matter, rather choosing to suspend judgment on the matter. The relation with the academic skeptics and the Roman era can be seen in relation with, among others, Cicero, a Roman statesman who served as both as a preservationist in storing valuable information about the school in form of ancient arguments through the publication of his Academia, the second of 5 books written by the author, as well as contributing a distinctively different take on academic skepticism. For Cicero, it was more important, after browsing through different philosophical positions, to choose the one that seemed rationally plausible, rather than to remain unconvinced as to which side to choose. Cicero can thus be seen as a sort of bridge between ancient and modern skepticism, reflecting a transitional state of skepticism in his writings. Like Platonists, Peripatetics, and Stoics, the Epicureans sought eudaimonia, but believed that this would be achieved through an absence of physical pain and mental disturbance. The word pleasure is often used here, but often has some popular misconceptions tied to it, resulting in a popular connotation with Epicureanism with maximizing one's pleasures. It's clear that maximizing a pleasure can lead to harm, as in drinking too much alcohol, which would cause both physical and mental distress, and would therefore not be aligned with Epicurean philosophy. Therefore, one cannot, without strawmanning, reduce this philosophy down to a simple crude form of hedonism, in which all pleasures should be sought for its own sake at all times. But for Epicurus, certain pleasures were natural, and a subgroup of these necessary, while other pleasures could be both unnecessary and trivial at the same time. Thus, the pleasures that were deemed necessary would fulfill some beneficial function, such as contributing to happiness, promoting freedom from pain in the form of bodily discomfort, or for simply the maintenance of life itself. One may further distinguish between necessary pleasures, which can be seen as a form of replenishment, e.g., hunger or thirst, against more fleeting or kinetic pleasures such as sensuous sounds or smells. It was this first kind of pleasure which Epicurus really pursued, after, as commented upon, a person having reached a state where one is no longer in need, one has reached a static form of pleasure, being the most agreeable. Now, we may here object and say that pain often accompanies pleasure, or that we may even regard pain as a greater pleasure in some circumstances, in which the Epicurean will reply that although every state of pain is to be regarded as evil, not all pains are uniformly to be rejected. It may be in circumstances such as running a marathon that the pains experienced along the way are to be seen as a contribution to a greater desire in the end, and it would therefore follow that this pain should not be rejected, as it could, in the long run, assuming the activity is taken in a healthy manner, lead to a greater absence of pain. But more importantly, the pleasure derived, in the end, would overall contribute to less mental disturbance. Overall, eudaimonia therefore meant for Epicurus a disciplining of the appetites, curtailment of desires, and overall focus of leading the simple life. It is interesting to note here that while philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius both lived affluent lifestyles, in virtue of Seneca being one of Rome's super-rich in his time and Marcus Aurelius being an emperor. However, in contrast to the hypocritical stance taken by these philosophers in reference to their anti-consumerist attitude, Epicurus led an aesthetic life aligned with a strong human disposition and holding steadfast to his principles, as attested by other historical witnesses at the time. As an extension of placing emphasis on pleasure in regard to leading the happy life, Epicurus placed a strong emphasis on friendship, or Greek philia, or we may rather say friendship meant as a few group of select friends. Friendship, according to Epicurus, was to be valued extremely highly, as it is one of not the best way of attaining pleasure, the very core of ethical Epicureanism. To quote, "Friendship goes dancing around the world, announcing to all of us to wake up to happiness." We can here contrast Epicurus' view on friendship with his otherwise individual ethical prescriptions, which may border on a hedonistic ethical framework. In regards to friendship, Epicurus offers us a contrasting view of gentleness and extended kindness to friends, suggestive of invoking altruism in relation with friends. When taken together with Epicurus' human concern, it's clear that one cannot contain Epicureanism within a strictly individualistic line of philosophical thinking. Despite this, Epicurus did not offer up a highly developed theorized social theory with all of its intricacies and facets, to be employed on society as a whole. This may have been due to a predilection of escapism when confronted with otherworldly problems, stating that, "Withdraw from the world, avoid the pains and dangers of involvement, seek your own security and serenity." That is not to say that one cannot develop such an ethical theory with a foundation in Epicureanism more akin to the universal prescriptive theories found in, say, John Stuart Mill or Jeremy Bentham. Although the majority of focus since the death of Epicurus has been on the former's ethical theories, there is much to say about his views on metaphysics. Epicurus was an atomist, believing all substance to be reducible down to the atoms. The word atom comes from the Greek atomos, meaning indivisible, although we have since learned that the atom is further divisible into subatomic particles, where a further division exists between composite and elementary particles. The name, however, has stuck. Epicurus himself was so enamored with atoms that he tried to explain all natural phenomena in terms of atoms, and also rejected Platonism, sticking to a form of atomic materialism where reality was reducible down to matter. He was therefore, along with Lucretius, an early, although not the first, exponent of propagating the theory of atoms, along with being an early strong proponent of ancient materialism. That is not to say that he had anything to do with developing atomic theory, which was obviously taken up by physicists at a much later juncture. The ancient Greeks, including Epicurus, were interested in exploring the age-old ontological question of what is really the nature of the real world hidden behind the veil of the ordinary everyday world. For Epicurus, he declared that nothing is generated from the non-existence. This is in reference to the fact that if it were possible to create something out of nothing, then anything at any time could appear before us without reference to the seminal particles which Epicurus believed to be necessary. The further entailment would be that it would be possible to create independent fixed happenings in nature with no discernible reason or pattern, i.e., appearing at random, leading to a rather chaotic existence. This line of thought is strikingly modern in terms of its epistemological content found in science today, otherwise known as universal causation, where it holds for every event that it must have a prior cause known or not known, i.e., if an event occurs, then it is the result of a previous event related in some way. We may furthermore, in philosophy, then talk of the different natures of origin causation following the chain of preceding events, where we find views such as foundationalism, coherentism, and epistemological infinitism. The view that nothing is generated from nothing also had ethical implications for Epicurus in his empiricist epistemology, who would negatively regard what he saw as the superstitious gatekeepers of religion, where a much more strict emphasis was placed upon dogma and in turn avoiding natural causes for underlying explanation than Epicurus himself was comfortable with. That is not to say that one may view him as a strict atheist, although he certainly did not believe in an afterlife. He instead envisioned a new form of religion based upon contemplation instead of superstition, where he did not believe that prayers could be heard. That is, if there existed gods, then they did not meddle with everyday affairs, and there was also placed a heavy weight on ethical liberation for humankind regarding his notion of religion. For Epicurus, the existence of something instead of nothing was attributed to quote him, a fortuitous concourse of atoms. Thus, for Epicurus, the beings in existence may very well have been created, but he maintained at the same time, according to his materialism, that the world was non-purposeful taken as a whole. Likewise, the practice of science was to be done not for the sole purpose of doing science, but instead because it could be tied to human happiness. This ties in nicely with what Epicurus considered the all-serving purpose of knowledge, be it metaphysical or scientifical, it must strive to achieve what he referred to as Ataraxia, or the cultivation of peace in mind. Being one of the first to use this term, it originally meant the ideal state of mind for soldiers entering battle. Now, as both ancient Greece as well as ancient Roman civilization found itself in both political turmoil as well as engaged in various wars throughout its existence, this formulation should not be so surprising, and ataraxia may be further tied in regards to Epicureans to a notion of an ideal form of serenity, which was also projected onto their gods and was something they wished to imitate, which is summarized in the Latin phrase imitatio Dei. This also meant for Epicurus that there was a misalignment between ataraxia and superstitious belief, as these worshippers came in conflict with both contemplation and the interpretations Epicureans held of happiness through desire in the form of ataraxia, i.e., this form of popular religion destroyed ataraxia through itself being fear-producing. It's interesting here to observe how virtue ethics, or more precisely, the Epicurean notion of happiness, seems to be tied strongly within both metaphysics as well as epistemology. This could perhaps try to explain the dominating association of Epicurean philosophy with that of its ethics. To summarize, we have here looked at the major tenets and traditions found in Epicurean philosophy within the branches of ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology. It's important to note that while we have looked at some commonly held views of Epicureans, we are still observers trying to make interpretations in our own time, and as such, we need not just to read the original text, but to try and make sense of the interpretations in view of our own worldview and temporal place in history. Epicurus himself may be long dead, but his philosophy continues to be of interest and perhaps even inspiration for his readers and followers.